Hello, and welcome to another United GIP webinar. Today, our speaker will be Philip Sheng-Hao Toung, who is a member of our technical staff at Shinjyu Global IP. Philip holds a degree in electrical computer engineering from the University of Toronto. His practice areas include software patents, mechanical patents, and electrical patents. Philip is also trilingual, speaking English, Chinese, and Japanese. And today, Philip will be telling us all about Startup IP 101. So without further ado, take it away, Philip.
Thank you, Todd, for the introduction, and thank you all for tuning in today. I assume that most of you are watching this because you're interested in IP, and you probably heard the term IP a lot. But today I'm giving a very fundamental lecture on why you need to think IP. And throughout the lecture, I'm going to make generalization. So please remember that. Obviously, we can go into the details, well, but every case may have their own unique features. So I will have to make generalization. Just please remember that. But anyways, the key takeaway will remain the same. So hopefully everybody will get something meaningful out of this. All right. So when people talk about IP, and in this case, let's talk about patent. You're probably thinking, you read about it on the news. So oh, we need a strong patent, we need a high quality patent, or a valuable patent, or enforceable patent. There are a lot of words being thrown around, but what exactly does that mean, and what do we do? And let's say you are a startup CTO, or maybe you're the IP department's director, and your CEO comes to you and say, all right, we got great innovation. Now we got to protect our IP. Give me the best patent. The CEO is not it's not an expert in IP, so he gives you this instruction. What do you do? So, everybody wants a great patent, and he wants the best patent. So before I start giving you all the advice that I will later on, let me tell you a small story of a man called Howard Moskowitz, who is an American market researcher who's very famous actually. And if you may, please just go to a TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell for all the details of this story. But I will just give you a very brief version of this story, which may not seem relevant right away, but I'll get to the point. So, Mr. Moskowitz has his own consulting firm at the beginning of his career, and Pepsi went to him for a task. Basically, Pepsi went to him and say, "Okay, we're going to make Diet Pepsi. There's this new sweetener, and we're going to find out what is the best Pepsi, the perfect Pepsi that the consumer will like." So Howard Moskowitz, who is a market researcher, obviously, is happy to take this job. And what Pepsi told him is that they have a range of sweetness in this new Pepsi that they're trying to make, and the sweetness will be between 8% to 12%, and they're basically trying to find the perfect sweetness for their drink. So naturally, Mr. Moskowitz go to the market start doing survey and collected the data point. Obviously, right? They make different samples of the Pepsi with different sweetness. The idea was that, as you may assume, if you collect the data and then you analyze them, you'll probably get a pretty good bell curve, and you'll find out, most people prefer a specific sweetness, and that's the perfect Pepsi. So that was the hope. However, when Mr. Moskowitz came back with the data and conducted his analysis, he realized that the data points were scattered all over the place. There is no bell curve. So it's just different people, different preference. So literally the research, the project was inconclusive. So we wouldn't call this a success for a market researcher, but what he realized was that all along, the company and him, they were asking the wrong question. He said they were looking for the perfect Pepsi. Instead, they should have been looking for the perfect Pepsis. And you're probably wondering what exactly does that mean? So basically, his conclusion was that there was no perfect Pepsi, not a singular one. They should be looking for perfect Pepsis. And this leads to his success in this next story. So basically, the company Campbell Soup, who makes spaghetti sauces, also went to Mr. Moskowitz for a project. They make the tomato sauce for pasta, and at that time, they're not very successful, even though they make great tomato sauce. So, just like Pepsi, Campbell Soup was asking Moskowitz to find the perfect spaghetti sauce that everybody will like. But now we know that, there is no perfect spaghetti sauce, according to Howard Moskowitz. So what he did was he made 45 varieties of sauces, and he's making all the different modifications, different sweetness, different level of garlic, different sourness, different amount of tomato, different amount of solid chunks of tomato. So he's just making a, a large groups of variety of sauces, and he brings this entire sample to the market to do his survey. And the finding came back, and it was really interesting because it turns out most of the consumers, even though there's no one single preference of spaghetti sauce, so there was no perfect spaghetti sauce in this case. Um, he found that you can group these consumers into clusters. Some people like plain, some people like spicy, and some people like what he called extra chunky. And this is an interesting finding because back in the days, there were no extra chunky tomato sauce. You know, um, you get a creamy, like a text, like a ketchup kind of texture. It's smooth, it's silky. There were no solid tomato chunks in any of the spaghetti sauces. And the company had no idea that actually the consumers, there's a third of consumers in the market who love these extra chunky sauces. So the company Campbell Soup, they went back, they actually made a new lineup of their product. And for the next 10 years, this extra chunky sauce made a sales of more than $600 million. So that was a great success. And you can probably see that. And in fact, if you go to your nearby supermarkets, you will see that you get more than one type of tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce. Right? And I'm gonna thank Mr. Moskowitz for that. He basically discovered that there are client preference, because consumer preference that we're not even um, what like not the companies are aware of. So this is a very interesting story. And why am I talking about this? Because let's get back to the question that your CEO threw to you. Give me the best patent. I'm going to argue that that was a wrong question because there is no best patent. And for the rest of this lecture, I'm going to explain what I mean, and I will try to explain what you need to know. So, first of all, the question to ask is never give me the best patent. Remember, there is no best patent, just like there's no best product. Right? Earlier, we talked about Pepsi Coke, we talked about the spaghetti sauce. So, the patent, now we're talking about patent. But we don't, just like the previous cases, we don't know what the customer likes. So, there's no perfect product. So, it's meaningless to look for a best patent for a perfect product, which doesn't even exist. Instead, what we need to do is we need to build a portfolio. And I call it a strategic patent portfolio. Please just let me clarify, just in case, let me clarify the term strategy. When talking about strategy, most of us think of the intended strategy, what you decide at the beginning when you start a project. This is what our company wants to do, this is our strategy, and we stick to it, right? What a lot of people forget is that actually there is a second part of your strategy called the emergent strategies. And by the way, I didn't come up with these terms. These are done by like proper professors from well-known institutes. So you can go look it up. I will not go into the details. But anyways, so the strategy that you actually carry out, the realized strategy, actually a part of it is called the emergent strategy, which is never intended. And you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't that just be like luck? But not really. I'll give you an example. So the example of emergent strategy. I'm sure if you were born, okay, unless you are still a teenager, there's a very good chance that you know the company Kodak. So back in the 90s or the 80s, if you're talking about taking a photo, then you know the company Kodak. They make films for cameras. So obviously they went out of business. They filed for bankruptcy back in 2012. And so why am I talking about this company that seems to have failed miserably, who actually filed for bankruptcy? It's because they went out of business, but if you look at some of these articles that I cut and pasted here, the year that they actually filed for bankruptcy, they received, in this one specific example only, they received $550 million from Samsung for patent licensing, or actually damage. So they sued Samsung for patent infringement. It's the technology is related to the digital imaging patent, and they got a lot of money out of this. Of course, their core business was, they still failed. But this is an example of how a company, they, even though their core business was related to the film, they did realize that digital camera is the future, and they actually planned ahead. They actually had quite a few patents um, associated with digital cameras, and they started using those patents to sue some of the really well-known mobile phone companies like Samsung, like Apple, HTC. So, and they actually were quite successful when it comes to those patent disputes. So they actually made a lot of money out of that, although it didn't save them from bankruptcy. This is just an example, how um, um, it was this patent dispute was not part of their intended strategy. However, they prepare for it because they know, the future is in digital camera. So they do have the patents there. They get ready. They actually got ready, and at the end of the day, it became part of their strategy to as income, or at least to get some revenue out of it. So sorry, back to um, what we are talking about earlier. I just that was an example that I wanted to mention because um, when people think of strategy, they didn't realize a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the time strategy can emerge from somewhere that you are not aware of at the beginning. So, anyways, so if we're talking about pattern, let's get to the basics. So, first of all, if you don't have innovation, then you don't need patent. I think that should be very intuitive. You get a patent to protect your innovation, right? You have R&D, they're doing a good job. You have new technology, gotta protect them. If you don't have that, you don't need to protect. So I think that's a pretty intuitive prerequisite. Another thing that you have to remember is that if you're not willing to disclose your technology, then don't apply for a patent. Because basically what patent is it gives you this exclusive right. This is your right, it's your technology, it's your innovation. It gives you a right, but in exchange, you have to disclose it so that, maybe down the road after 20 years, other people can refer to can rely on your technology and build something new again, something even better. So it's some sort of I guess this is a trade-off, but you will have to disclose it. If you have to be willing to disclose this if you um, want to use patent to protect your innovation. So some of you might be wondering, then what if I don't want to disclose it? I don't want anybody to know my technology at all, like ever. Well, that's um, possible, and that's quite reasonable, depending on what um, what exactly you do. For example, um, Coca-Cola's formula, you know, or KFC's spice recipe. Those were never patented. They were kept as trade secrets, and the consumer, just by drinking the Coke or eating the fried chicken, they wouldn't know exactly what the formula is. So you can, by keeping something a secret, you can protect it. But it depends on the nature of your product. For example, if you're building some special mechanical device and with a specific structure or shape, most likely when the consumer sees it or touches it, they'll be able to figure out what it looks like, how it feels like. So for that kind of things, you can't really keep your innovation a secret. So your only options may have to be to get a patent for it. So yeah, so the willingness to disclose, that's something to keep in mind. You don't have to file for patents for everything if you don't want. If it's something that you can keep a secret, and if it's something you don't want to disclose, then don't file for a patent. Another example is Google's search algorithm. Usually, software algorithm, those are from outside. It's hard to know exactly what the algorithm is. So just if Google just keeps it a secret, then we will never know what's going on inside. So they don't really have to get a patent for it. So that's just an example. So okay, so earlier, remember I was talking about not looking for the perfect, the best patent, but we need to get a patent portfolio. So here's one example. Let's say your company makes several products, and for each product you have some inventions. Uh, Imagine this is your competitor's product, so it's different from your product, and it's different from your inventions. So even though you guys are competing against each other, if you file your patents based on this product, based on your products, um, you are not really keeping your competitors at bay, even though you guys are still competing, and then, you know, um, you can compete in different ways by marketing or some other ways. But let's say if you file 4 patents, the ones show with the red circles, the 4 patents associated with the 4 product, um, these are not good enough to 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 be a weapon against your competitor. Let's say, what if you have the same 4 products, and you know what the inventions are, but as part of your strategy, you broaden the scope of your invention, you broaden the scope of your patents. Now, when your competitors has this product in the market, you can use your patents to attack your competitor. I don't want to use the word attack, but I think it's easier to understand. So please bear with me. Um, so the word broad is quite often talked about in our industry. Um, then some people, it might be difficult for some of you to understand what a broad patent might look like, because when people apply for patents, sometimes they think of patents as their product. This is my product, this is how it looks like, so my patent will look exactly like my product. But that's not the case. So I'll give one example that demonstrate what a broad patent might look like. So in Japan, um, traditionally people eat rice cake. Um, so basically, it's just a piece of cake that's made by rice, and very often you grill it, you heat it up, just as you can see from this photo, before you eat it. That's pretty straightforward, right? And you'll think, well, this is just a traditional kind of food in Japan. There's nothing too fancy or um, new about this, but you will be wrong, because in fact there are 2 major rice cake manufacturers in Japan, and they actually do file a lot of patents. And the example that I will show you today is so it's a patent owned by a company called Ichigo, and Ichigo's patent is for a rice cake with a slit on the side. So if you see this picture, the rice cake on the left, that's basically their patent. So if you have a rice cake with a slit on the side, that's covered by the patent. So the competitor, which is Sato is also a very big rice cake manufacturer. They make all kinds of rice cakes with different slits, different cuts, and the two rice cakes you see on the right were made by Sato. So obviously, if you just look at the rice cake, they look different, but we're talking about pattern here. So as long as any rice cake has a slit on its side, it's covered by Ichigo's patent. So in 2009, Ichigo filed two separate lawsuits against Sato based on this rice cake slit patent. And they won. And in fact, they were awarded with a damage of 10 million US dollars, which is a lot of money, especially you consider, they're just making rice cakes. I guess it also shows that Japanese people eat a lot of rice cake, but that's not it, right? I'm using this to show you that, if you have a very simple, very broad patent, it can be very powerful because, it's just a slit. Nothing else. It's just a slit. It's very broad. So it can cover all kinds of different competitors' product in this case. So when you talk to people in IP and they're talking about, oh, the patent scope is broad, or it's too narrow. This is what they're talking about. Not every patent is equal. Depending on how you draft it, depending on how you write your claims in the patent, some patents can be much more powerful if it has a much broader scope. So of course, now we talk about, patent portfolio. I just want to remind everybody that, especially if your company is relatively successful, you're probably thinking not just the domestic market. So how I showed you earlier how your patent portfolio can hold back your competition, right? But now imagine if your competition is not only in one country, but maybe it's in the US, maybe it's also in Europe, maybe there's one in Asia. So now we're talking about building a patent portfolio that has to go, that has to be global, international. So this can get pretty complicated, but I will not go into the details because different countries have different practice, and I'm sure my colleagues who gave you all the previous lectures, I'm sure you can learn a lot about each individual country's practices. So let's get back to, sorry, I'm just giving a lot of different content. I know. So, but stick with me. So now you understand why a strategic patent portfolio is important, right? And the portfolio is made of individual patents, and all these patents, hopefully they're useful, they're broad. And that is how you use this this is how you protect your innovation, and this is how you use your innovation to hold back competition. So I hope you understand that. And some of you might be wondering, well, actually, I understand it, but I'm in this startup and our CEO and CFO don't understand the importance of patent. For example, if you are the CTO and you understand the importance to protect your technology, but your CEO or CFO don't understand it, or if the CFO think, well, you're spending too much money on it, you're a cost center. So sometimes it's not easy for some non-IP people to understand the importance of patent. And I mean, don't lose hope, because it's actually quite easy to understand why they don't understand it. So especially in a startup, when we talk about starting a startup, especially if you want to start something that become, if you want something that's successful, we talk about lean startup, we talk about agile, right? To be successful as a startup, most often, we talk about how you have to minimize the loop, be speedy, right? Be good at pivoting, right? Like making changes, adapting to changes. We talk about pivot, we talk about making changes, and everything needs to be flexible and agile. And for startup to survive, to be successful, that's how they think. I shouldn't use the word they, it's we, because I've been there, I understand. That's how we think. And it's necessary. That's how we become successful as a startup. Unfortunately, that doesn't work very well with the patent procedure. I just want to show you. So when we talk about lean startup and agile, we're talking about loops, we're talking about pivot, we're talking about making changes. It's very speedy, it's very simple and fast. Now I'm showing you two flow charts, one from the USPTO, one from the European Patent Office, and you see there's nothing agile about it. There's nothing lean about it. In fact, to go through all these steps from filing an application all the way to getting a patent, right? Everything, it's a waterfall, and there's so many different steps, and everything you have, literally everything you have, is in the application you submitted at the beginning. That's highlighted by the red circle on the screen. So there's no pivoting. You can understand that. That's this the flow itself. It's very inconsistent. It doesn't align with what the startups think. But this is very important um, because there is no pivoting during the process when you're filing, when you're trying to get a patent, right? You file the application, and then the procedure starts, and there's not much pivoting outside the box. Everything you have is in that original application. And that's why the original application is very important. The only way for a startup to get a good patent, a useful patent within this structure, is to make sure that the original application you have is properly drafted. Because everything you have, it's submitted at the beginning, right? So you need to make sure that you have enough content in that application that allow you to pivot within the scope of the application. Because you cannot, after I filed the application, you cannot say, "Oh, I missed something. I'll add it later." You can't do that. You cannot add something later. If you add something later, that's a new application. That's a different part. It's not the same application. So basically, the initial application, because you cannot add a lot of things afterwards, you gotta make sure it's a useful application when you first submitted it. And what might a useful patent application look like? I don't have the examples right now because it's it will be too much. But my suggestion is that, for example, if you go look at some of the big pharmaceutical companies' patents, the big pharmas, all the pharmaceutical companies, they rely on their patents because that's all they have. If someone copies their patent, their medicine, they're doomed, right? So um, you should go take a look at the big pharma's patents, and typically, I'm making generalization here, but typically you'll see that the applications are long, with a lot of data, with a lot of different examples and different comparative examples, So when you have a large number of data and examples, this allows you to pivot within the scope of your application throughout the process. You cannot add more things afterwards into your application. So make sure you have a lot of things in there at the beginning. So that's a very simple advice that I can give. But yeah, so again, so as someone in the startup, what can you do now? Like now, right? And how do you do it? So first of all, I hope you understand why a strategic patent portfolio is necessary. I'm not saying it's useful. I'm saying it's necessary. Um, and once you understand it, then you can explain to your CEO, you can explain it to your CFO, and then I think that would be a good start. In fact, that's a necessary start. So why is a strategic patent portfolio necessary? The most important reason is because it helps you hold back the competition. As you can, I hope you understand this based on some of the previous slides. Um, the only way to hold back your competition is through having a good patent portfolio. And this also allows you to enhance your commercialization strategy and increase your enterprise value. Uh, I hope this is intuitive, but just in case, I'll explain how the patent portfolio enhance your commercialization strategy. Okay. So again, this is not, I didn't come up with these terms or the theory, but this is done by some really well-known professors and researchers throughout the years. So you can really trust these findings. Anyways, so for a startup, usually when a startup is in a market competing against the incumbents, right? There are four different types of environment, and I think if you rely on this table or sorry figure, you'll see why patent portfolio is so important. So basically, if you are the startup and you cannot, your innovation cannot preclude effective development by the incumbents. So basically, if you don't have your patents protect your product. So on the left side, the no, then you realize that you are in trouble because most of the time, so the incumbents are more likely than not the more well-known companies, possibly the bigger companies. You're the small new startup. They are probably, they've been in this market for years. They probably have more history or reputation, right? So if your innovation cannot preclude the development by the incumbents, then we're talking about what we call the attacker's advantage. You just have to. So basically, it's either if you don't have if you cannot protect your innovation and the incumbents' assets cannot contribute to the value proposition, then what happens is we're in this environment called the attacker's advantage, where whoever moves faster, you're just gonna attack first. That's basically the strategy. I know I'm making generalization, but that's basically it. So and most likely or not, you are not going to win the battle because the incumbents, if they're the bigger company, they probably have more people, they have more resources, and they have more money. So I'm not saying you cannot win, but it's a tough battle to be fight. Uh, sorry, to be fought. All right. So let's say you can protect your innovation. Then the whole story is different because we're talking about the yes at the bottom part. So if you can protect your innovation and the incumbents don't have anything to contribute to the value proposition, then basically we're talking about greenfield competition, or some people can consider this the blue ocean. Basically, you will have the market, on your by yourself because the incumbents they don't have anything to contribute. And that's great. That's probably the best situation you want to be in. And let's say, even if you're not there, let's say if you have some great innovation and you can protect it, but the incumbents also have some assets to contribute to a value proposition, then this is the environment where we call the idea factory. And it's very common for pharmaceutical companies. In the pharmaceutical industry, you don't see a startup that become you very I don't say never. You rarely see any startup that rise and grow a gigantic multinational mega pharma firm on its own. Very often, the startup, they have some great innovation, they probably have some good research, and they get some new medicine, and eventually they get acquired by the big pharmaceutical companies. This is because, the incumbents, the big companies, they have the retail channels, they have different assets that contribute to the value proposition, even though the actual idea originally come from the small startups. So anyway, but that's not bad because for the startup, that's a very successful strategy too. So I use the red square the rectangle to highlight the two environments there. Even though that's the two are different, for the startups, those are very good strategy. I think they can lead to pretty good success. And there's this research by the USPTO that actually showed that if you have a good patent portfolio, if your company has a good patent portfolio, then there is a higher chance of you getting to a successful IPO. In fact, the the difference is pretty substantive. It's 150% more likely that you will have a successful IPO. Or there's an 84% of chance of more where you get a successful acquisition. For acquisition, of course, depending on whether or not you want to sell a company, that may or may not be your ideal exit strategy. But for those who were willing to do that, for those who are seeking acquisition as the exit strategy, I think the patent portfolio works really well. Right. So there are data that shows for a fact that the patent portfolio actually make your business more valuable, make your business more successful. And this is just another example that I will show. This is I got the past financial statement, the annual report from Abbey, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. I think it's likely top 5, I believe. And this is I want to talk about the intangible assets, which is the important part of a pharmaceutical company. That's where the patents are valued. And if you go through this year by year, you realize that there are a couple of years where the intangible asset just rocket, like it grew by an enormous amount, right? And do you know what happened? Of course, every single one of them was a result of an acquisition. So I'm using this example not to show that Abby is successful. Actually, I want you to think of yourself as these smaller companies that were acquired. Okay? Because this is, well, I mean, the acquisition case in the 2020, that's a $63 billion acquisition. So even though we're talking about startup, we're not talking about like small business. We're talking about $1 billion business here. So this is something that you, or at least the CEO or CFO of your company, have to think about. This is the type of exit strategy that they might be thinking already, but to get to that, to get to this, if you want to have this type of success, then a patent portfolio, a proper, strategically thought through patent portfolio is necessary. All right. So I know this might seem kind of dumb, but so what's your next step? And the next step is find a good patent agent. It sounds very simple, but and I'm not kidding. This is actually quite crucial. And by good, I'm not talking about just someone who's expensive or someone who's been in the industry for like 30 years or 40 years. It doesn't have to be that. A good patent agent has to understand what your needs are, because every company has different unique characters, and you have a different product. Everybody has, you compete in different markets. You have a different desirable exit strategy. So a good patent agent has to understand your business and your strategy in order to offer the best advice. There are patent agents that just simply follow instructions from a client. For startups, however, perhaps those are not the best patent agent. A patent agent work with you as a partner. They have to offer the professional, strategic advice that you need, because you and I, we all know that startups is not easy. It's not easy to fight against the incumbents. So um, it's you gotta find a patent agent who knows what you need. So that's probably the next step, and probably the only thing that really matters, because what happens afterwards is more like once you get a patent agent that understands your needs, he or she will guide you through the necessary steps. For example, I listed patent mining here. Patent mining is basically for you to understand what kind of patents you can get out of your innovation, right? You have a product and it's a great product. It's nice, it's new, but exactly what kind of patents can you get out of this? So you have to do a lot of brainstorming, thinking, um, where are your inventions? Remember, it you have one product, but this one product doesn't mean one patent, right? Different parts of the product. Maybe you have some really, really cool innovation that's worth protecting. So patent mining is something you do with your patent agent, and it's quite it's very important. It's very important to as a first step, because that's when you decide what kind of patent portfolio you can build. Right? You need to have multiple patents to build a portfolio, and you have to go through that patent mining process to understand what kind of patent you can get. But the next I wrote here is the freedom to operate searches, and you're probably wondering what that is. Freedom to operate is basically a search of, you do a patent search to understand the industry, to understand what your competitors may have filed already, what patents already exist in this sector. Um, so if you understand what your competitors are doing, then maybe it allow you to make better strategic decision. For example, um, if your competitors are already filing lots and lots of patents in a specific technology, then when you're using a similar technology, maybe you have to be careful. You don't want to infringe your competitors' patents, right? Maybe you have to design your product in a way to avoid that risk, for example. Or maybe you realize that none of your competitors are paying attention to a specific technology that you think has great potential. Then maybe that's where you file a lot of patents, and maybe that's gonna be your strength. Um, so basically, freedom to operate search, or um, you know a patent map sometimes can help you understand the industry, understand the sector, to decide how and where you file your patents. And I know that a lot of the engineers, or for a lot of the startups, sometimes you think, whoa, no, 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 our product is the best. There's no one doing the same thing. We have the greatest innovation. Nobody does it. It's just us. We're new, we're cool, we're unique, we're special. And that's a really good mindset, but you got to be careful because you could be wrong. Um, I mean, let's use Dyson as an example. It's a very famous company for making the fan without any blades, right? It's really cool. That's like, whoa, that's new. Nobody has that when it first came out in, I think, the early 2000s, I think. And what you see on screen right now, unfortunately, that wasn't even Dyson. Um, you're probably thinking, well, okay, you thought that was Dyson, probably because it was a bladeless fan. But actually, the Toshiba, the Japanese manufacturer of it, appliances, they had a very similar patent. Not very similar. They had a bladeless fan back in 1981. They never had the product, but they filed for a patent. So this is just one example showing that you may or may not know everything in your industry. So, just in case. For example, like Dyson, I assume they were not aware of this Toshiba patents when they first filed their um, patent application. So it's once they identified it, I mean, they can make design changes. They can, I mean, they're still very successful. But I'm just using this to show that sometimes you don't know everything that has happened, especially in different countries. So that's why freedom to operate searches is probably something useful. And this is just one example of that type of report to show you what a patent map or freedom to operate searches might look like. Uh, I will not go through the details, but as one example on the screen here, this is about the hybrid electric vehicle. And there are a lot of problems to be solved in this industry. For example, the battery life, or the performance of the coolant, the speed, the fuel efficiency. There's lots and lots of issues to be addressed, and there are lots and lots of different proposed solutions or technology. Right. So you by doing this search, you can identify, for example, how many patents have been filed for what uh, technical solution. For example, you can see what companies are focusing on which uh, specific problems to be solved. So basically, it's a visualized tool for you to understand what your competitors are doing, so that you can plan for yourself, like what you need to do. So before before I let you go today, I think the key takeaway I hope that you'll get out of this is that probably throughout this entire lecture, you notice that I didn't um, I try to convince you that patent portfolio is what you need to be successful. Right? You use it to hold your competition at bay. You use it to increase your own value, to enhance your strategy. So I want you to remember that developing a patent portfolio is not like buying insurance. A lot of people misunderstood this. Some CEO or CFO, they think of patent, oh, it costs money. It's like buying insurance. It's we spend the money to, just in case, to protect ourselves. But I hope, in the past 50 minutes, I I convinced you that patent portfolio is much more than that. It's something that's essential, necessary for the startup's success. So if there's one takeaway, please remember this: developing a patent portfolio is not buying insurance. What it is developing an investment plan. This is investment. You build your patent portfolio, you use it to get more return, to increase the value. And if you can explain this to your CFO and the CEO, hopefully they'll understand that better. And um, I wish you success. And that's the end of the talk today.
Wow. Thank you so much for that informative presentation. I know that all of us will now be thinking a lot more about strategic patent portfolios. Again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to your attendance at future events.